What if everything you failed at wasn't your fault? Not the job you lost, not the relationship that fell apart, not the goal you abandoned at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday when you told yourself, maybe I'm just not that kind of person. What if the real problem, the only problem, was never your circumstances, your upbringing, or your bad luck? What if it was the software running silently inside your skull? Here's what nobody tells you. Your brain was programmed before you were old enough to drive, vote, or choose your own friends. By age 7, the core operating system of your mind was already installed. And most of that programming? You never consented to it. The beliefs about whether you're smart enough, whether you deserve success, whether people like you actually make it, those weren't conclusions you reached after careful reflection. They were handed to you by teachers who were overwhelmed, by parents who were scared, by a culture that profits from your self-doubt. And here's the part that should make your blood run hot: that programming has been running your life ever since. But in the next 30 days, you're going to do something most people never do. You're going to rewrite the code. Not with willpower, not with hustle, not with motivational quotes on your bathroom mirror, with neuroscience, with precision, with a system so specific, so deliberate, that your brain will have no choice but to change. Control is yours. But first, you need to understand exactly what you're up against. The hidden operating system. Every morning, millions of Americans wake up, reach for their phones, scroll through other people's highlight reels, and feel a quiet, gnawing sense that something is wrong with them. They work hard, they try, they read the books and listen to the podcasts, and yet the same patterns keep repeating. The same anxiety, the same procrastination, the same quiet voice whispering, "Who do you think you are?" That voice has a name. It's called your mental programming. And understanding it is the first step to taking back control. Think of your mind as the most sophisticated computer ever built. It processes 11 million bits of information per second. It manages your heartbeat, your memories, your emotions, and your decisions simultaneously, without rest. But like any computer, it runs on software. And that software was written a long time ago. Neuroscientists have confirmed what philosophers have suspected for centuries. The most formative period for human belief development is the first 7 years of life. During this window, your brain operates predominantly in what researchers call the theta state, a deeply receptive, almost hypnotic frequency where information bypasses critical analysis and goes straight into long-term storage. In plain English, before you were old enough to question anything, your brain was downloading everything. Every time an adult said, "Money doesn't grow on trees," your brain logged it as truth. Every time you were praised for staying quiet, your brain encoded silence as safety. Every time you watched someone you loved shrink in the face of authority, your brain filed it under, "This is how the world works." These weren't lessons, they were installations. And now, decades later, those installations run automatically. Every time you hesitate before asking for a raise, every time you self-sabotage a relationship that's going well, every time you feel undeserving of the very things you claim to want most. This is not a character flaw. This is a software problem. The brilliant and challenging truth about this realization is what comes next. Your brain is not fixed. It never was. For most of human history, scientists believed the adult brain was essentially static, that after a certain age, its structure was set, and that was that. Then came one of the most revolutionary discoveries in modern neuroscience, neuroplasticity. Your brain can rewire itself, at any age, under any circumstances. Every thought you think carves a microscopic groove in your neural landscape. Every repeated thought deepens that groove into a channel. Every habitual pattern becomes a river, powerful, fast, and seemingly unstoppable. But rivers can be rerouted. That's what this 30-day program is built to do. Not to motivate you temporarily, not to give you a weekend of inspiration that evaporates by Monday, but to systematically, deliberately, and permanently redirect the rivers in your mind toward the outcomes you actually want. The process has 3 stages. First, awareness, seeing your current programming clearly. Second, disruption, interrupting the patterns that no longer serve you. Third, installation, embedding new, empowering programs deep enough that they become automatic. By the time you reach day 30, you won't just think differently, you'll be different. Waking up inside your own mind. Most people go through their entire lives without ever truly meeting themselves. They know their name, their job title, their Netflix preferences. They know what they order at Starbucks and how they like their eggs. But they have almost no relationship with the single most active presence in their lives, their own mind. Right now, as you read these words, your brain is simultaneously managing your breathing, filtering irrelevant sensory data, cross-referencing what you're reading against your existing beliefs, and generating background commentary about all of it. That background commentary is the thing most people never examine. In psychology, it's called the default mode network, the brain's autopilot system that activates when you're not focused on a specific task. It's responsible for mind-wandering, self-referential thinking, and the endless internal monologue that runs from the moment you wake up to the moment you fall asleep. For the average person, that monologue sounds something like this. I need to reply to that email. Did I say something weird yesterday? Why can't I just get it together? Everyone else seems to have figured this out. What if I never do? I'm so tired. I need coffee. What was I just thinking about? This is not clarity. This is cognitive static. And it's costing you more than you know. The first skill in the 30-day system isn't a technique. It's a practice. It's called conscious awareness, and it's the foundation upon which every other transformation is built. Conscious awareness means becoming the observer of your mind rather than the prisoner of it. Here's the critical distinction. You are not your thoughts. You are the awareness that notices your thoughts. This might sound philosophical, but it has immediate practical power. When you can watch a thought arise, I'm going to fail at this, without fusing with it, without becoming it, you create space. And in that space lives the most powerful thing a human being can possess: choice. Most people don't experience that space. Fearful thought arrives, and within milliseconds they are fear. An angry thought surfaces, and instantly they are anger. The stimulus and the response collapse into each other with no gap between them. Viktor Frankl, the Austrian psychiatrist who survived Nazi concentration camps, identified this gap as the source of all human freedom. In his words, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and freedom. What he described from the depths of unimaginable suffering, neuroscience has since confirmed. The prefrontal cortex, the brain's seat of conscious decision-making, can override automatic emotional responses, but only when it's activated. And it's only activated when you're aware. So, how do you build this awareness? Start with 3 minutes. Set a timer. Sit quietly and simply notice what passes through your mind without trying to change it, analyze it, or judge it. Watch thoughts like, you'd watch clouds crossing an open sky. Some are heavy and dark, some are light and fleeting. None of them are permanent. This is not meditation as performance. This is mental training as survival skill. Because here's what happens when you practice this consistently. Your amygdala, the brain's alarm system, the source of fight or flight, begins to calm down. Your prefrontal cortex gets stronger. The gap between stimulus and response widens, and suddenly, life stops happening to you and starts happening through your choices. That's the shift that changes everything. Awareness also means beginning to notice your patterns, not just individual thoughts, but sequences, the chain reactions that govern your behavior. Someone gives you critical feedback. You feel a flash of shame. Shame triggers defensiveness. Defensiveness makes you dismiss the feedback. You miss an opportunity to grow. The same problem surfaces again 3 months later. Once you see that chain, you can break it. Anywhere. At any link. That's the power you're building. That's what day 1 through day 7 of this program is designed to cultivate. And it starts with a single radical act: paying attention. The beliefs that built your cage. In 1954, Roger Bannister did something that experts had declared physiologically impossible. He ran a mile in under 4 minutes. For decades before that moment, the 4-minute mile had been considered an absolute human limit. Doctors argued the heart would give out. Coaches said the lungs couldn't sustain it. Athletes who attempted it fell short, not just physically, but psychologically. The barrier existed as much in their minds as in their muscles. Then Bannister crossed it, and within 46 days, someone else did too. Within a year, 37 runners had broken the 4-minute mile. The physical limit hadn't changed. The human body in 1955 was identical to the human body in 1953. What changed was the belief about what was possible. That story isn't just inspiring, it's a blueprint. Your limiting beliefs are your 4-minute miles. They are not facts. They are conclusions, usually formed during emotionally intense moments, usually in childhood, usually in the absence of full information. And they have been shaping your behavior, your choices, and your outcomes ever since. Here's how limiting beliefs form. An experience occurs. Your young, pattern-seeking brain generates an explanation. That explanation gets filed as truth. Future experiences are filtered through that truth. Confirming evidence gets amplified. Contradicting evidence gets minimized or ignored. It's called confirmation bias, and your brain does it automatically, without your knowledge or consent. A girl is told by her 3rd-grade teacher that she's not a math person. Her brain files it. From that day forward, every math struggle confirms the belief. Every success gets explained away. I just got lucky, or that test was easy. By college, she avoids quantitative fields entirely. Not because of any real limitation, but because of one careless sentence spoken by someone who didn't understand the weight of words. Multiply that dynamic across dozens of domains: money, relationships, leadership, creativity, worthiness, and you begin to see the full architecture of the cage. The most insidious limiting beliefs share one characteristic. They don't feel like beliefs, they feel like reality. I'm just not confident. Not a belief. Feels like a fact. Success requires sacrifice I'm not willing to make. Not a belief. Feels like wisdom. People like me don't end up in rooms like that. Not a belief. Feels like common sense. The process of identifying your limiting beliefs requires a specific kind of honest excavation. Look at the areas of your life where you are chronically stuck, not occasionally challenged, chronically stuck. Where do you keep having the same argument, the same setback, the same ceiling? That's where the belief lives. Ask yourself, what would I have to believe for this pattern to make perfect sense? If you keep self-sabotaging financial success, you might believe that wealthy people are corrupt, or that wanting money is selfish, or that success would change you in ways that cost you belonging. If you keep choosing unavailable partners, you might believe that being truly known means being rejected, or that love and pain are inseparable, or that you are fundamentally too much, or not enough. These beliefs aren't logical, but they're not supposed to be. They were formed by a child trying to make sense of a confusing world. They're survival maps that have long outlasted their usefulness. The next step is the one that requires courage, challenging the belief's validity. Just because a belief is old doesn't make it true. Just because everyone around you holds it doesn't make it universal. Just because you can find evidence for it doesn't make it permanent. You can also find evidence for the opposite. For every person who believes success requires abandoning your values, there are leaders who built empires on integrity. For every person who believes love ends in pain, there are couples celebrating 50 years of genuine partnership. The evidence for limitation and the evidence for possibility both exist in equal measure in this world. The question is simply, which evidence are you choosing to focus on? This is your first act of reprogramming, not positivity, not denial, just the deliberate, honest decision to look for a fuller picture. Because the cage was never locked. You just needed to see the door. Reprogramming the machine beneath your thoughts. There's a part of your mind that never sleeps. While your conscious mind rests each night, it keeps working. While you're distracted by conversations, deadlines, and the noise of daily life, it keeps running its programs. It manages your heartbeat, it stores your memories, it executes the thousands of automatic behaviors that make up the invisible architecture of your day. This is your subconscious mind, and it is, without question, the most powerful and most misunderstood component of human psychology. The subconscious doesn't reason. It doesn't debate. It doesn't ask whether something is true or helpful or aligned with who you want to become. It simply executes the programming it has received, faithfully, consistently, without judgment. This is why changing behavior through willpower alone is one of the most inefficient strategies in human development. Willpower is a conscious function. The subconscious is not. When the two come into conflict, the subconscious wins, nearly every time. Not because you're weak, but because you're fighting a freight train with a bicycle. True transformation doesn't happen at the conscious level. It happens in the deep architecture beneath it. The subconscious mind learns through three primary mechanisms: repetition, emotion, and vivid imagery. Understanding these mechanisms isn't just academic. It's the engineering manual for your own reprogramming. Repetition is how habits form. Every time you think a thought or perform an action, you strengthen the neural pathway associated with it. The more frequently a pathway is activated, the more automatic it becomes. This is why you don't have to consciously think about how to drive a route you've taken 1,000 times. The program runs itself. The same principle applies to your beliefs. A thought repeated often enough becomes an assumption. An assumption accepted long enough becomes a conviction. A conviction held deeply enough becomes identity. This works for empowering beliefs just as powerfully as it works for limiting ones. Emotion is the accelerant. The subconscious mind prioritizes emotionally charged experiences over neutral ones. This is why a single moment of public humiliation can create a fear of speaking that lasts decades, while years of low-stakes success barely moves the needle. Emotion marks an experience as significant, and significance determines what gets stored deep versus what gets discarded. This also means that reprogramming requires more than mechanical repetition of positive statements. The new programming must be felt, not just recited. When you repeat an affirmation with genuine emotional engagement, when you actually feel the confidence, the security, the possibility it represents, you create the kind of neural imprint that lasts. Vivid imagery completes the triad. The subconscious mind, remarkably, cannot reliably distinguish between a vividly imagined experience and a real one. Brain scans of athletes performing physical movements and athletes vividly imagining those same movements show nearly identical neural activation patterns. This is not a metaphor. This is neuroscience. When you repeatedly and vividly imagine yourself succeeding, with full sensory detail, with genuine emotional engagement, with the texture and sound and feeling of the moment, your brain begins laying down neural tracks toward that outcome. Your automatic responses begin to shift. Your instincts start pointing in a new direction. Practical reprogramming begins with identifying your target, what specific belief, pattern, or automatic response you want to change. It then proceeds through 3 daily practices. Morning imprinting. In the first 10 minutes after waking, your brain is in an alpha state, calm, receptive, and highly suggestible. This is the optimal window for new programming. Use it deliberately. Speak your new beliefs aloud, with emotion. Visualize your desired outcomes in vivid detail. Set an intention for who you will be today. Not what you'll accomplish, but who you will be. Evening consolidation. As you drift toward sleep, your brain returns to the alpha and theta states. The same deep receptivity that characterized your childhood programming. Whatever you feed your mind in these final minutes becomes disproportionately influential. Make it count. Review what you did well. Visualize tomorrow's version of yourself. Affirm what you're becoming. Midday interruption. When you catch yourself running an old limiting program, a flash of unworthiness, a reflex of self-doubt, an automatic "I can't," interrupt it deliberately. Breathe. Name it. Replace it. This isn't suppression, it's redirection. You're not fighting the old neural pathway. You're simply choosing a different one until the new one is strong enough to become the default. The timeline for neurological change is not motivational mythology. Research in the field of habit formation and neural rewiring suggests that consistent practice over 30 to 66 days creates measurable structural changes in the brain. The myelin sheath, the insulating layer that makes neural pathways faster and more automatic, thickens around frequently used pathways. You are, quite literally, building a better brain. This is the work of days 8 through 14, not just understanding your subconscious programming, but actively, systematically replacing it. The voice in your head is lying to you. You talk to yourself more than you talk to anyone else in your life, more than your partner, more than your closest friend, more than any therapist, mentor, or coach you've ever had. The research is sobering. The average human generates between 60,000 and 70,000 thoughts per day. Studies suggest approximately 80% of those thoughts carry a negative emotional charge, and 95% are repetitive, the same thoughts cycling endlessly, day after day, year after year. Read that again slowly. 80% negative, 95% repetitive. This means that for most people, the dominant voice in their head is a relentless, circular machine of self-criticism, catastrophizing, and limitation, running on a loop they never chose and most have never questioned. This is not a character flaw. It's a survival mechanism that has outlived its usefulness. Negativity bias, the brain's tendency to weight threats more heavily than opportunities, evolved to keep our ancestors alive in an environment of genuine physical danger. In the savannas of prehistoric Africa, the cost of missing a threat was death. The cost of missing an opportunity was merely hunger. But you are not on a savanna. You are navigating a modern world that requires creativity, connection, risk tolerance, and resilience. And a mind wired to scan perpetually for danger is a catastrophic liability in that environment. Mastering your inner dialogue is not about becoming unrealistically positive. It's about becoming intentionally accurate, seeing reality clearly while refusing to add unnecessary suffering on top of it. The first discipline is catching yourself. This sounds simple. It is not. Most self-talk operates below conscious awareness, in the same way that background music in a store operates below your notice while still influencing your mood and behavior. Begin by flagging specific patterns, catastrophizing, jumping from a minor setback to a worst-case conclusion. I made a mistake in the presentation becomes, my career is over. Personalization, absorbing responsibility for things outside your control. They seem unhappy today becomes, I must have done something wrong. Overgeneralization, using a single data point to draw sweeping conclusions. That didn't work becomes, nothing ever works for me. Mind reading, assuming you know what others are thinking without evidence. They didn't respond quickly becomes, they're annoyed with me. Each of these patterns is a distortion, a place where your inner voice is not reporting reality, but creating a version of reality that confirms existing limiting beliefs, and each of them can be interrupted. The interruption process is direct. Notice, name, replace. Notice the thought as it arises. There's that catastrophizing pattern again. Name it without judgment. You're not bad for having it. Your brain is just running an old program. Then replace it with something more accurate and more useful. Not falsely positive, just less distorted. My career is over becomes, I made a mistake. I can learn from it and do better next time. Nothing ever works becomes, this approach didn't work. I need to adjust the strategy. Over time, this practice fundamentally reshapes the neural architecture of your inner voice. The catastrophizing pathways weaken from disuse. The accurate, empowering pathways strengthen from repetition. The voice in your head begins to sound less like a hostile critic and more like a wise, honest coach. That coach asks different questions, not, why does this always happen to me? But, what can I do differently? Not, what's wrong with me? But, what am I learning? Not, what if I fail? But, what if I actually succeed? And what would that require? Questions are among the most powerful tools in self-talk programming because they direct your brain's attention. Your mind will always attempt to answer the questions you ask it, consciously or unconsciously. If you ask a terrible question, your brain will find a terrible answer. If you ask a powerful question, your brain will begin searching for a powerful answer. This isn't magic. It's how the reticular activating system works. The brain's filter that determines what information you consciously notice from the millions of bits available at any moment. Shift your questions, and you literally shift what your brain shows you about the world. The practice of days 8 through 12 is simple, demanding, and transformative. Become the editor of your own mind, not the censor, the editor. You're not eliminating thoughts. You're choosing which ones to amplify, which ones to question, and which ones to let dissolve without giving them a starring role in your story. Your emotions are data, not destiny. Here is the most liberating truth in modern psychology. Your emotions are not caused by events, they are caused by your interpretation of events. This is not a philosophical nuance. It is a neurological fact with profound practical implications. Two people receive the same unexpected criticism from their supervisor. One leaves the meeting energized. Great feedback. Now I know exactly where to improve. The other spirals into a 3-day shame storm, convinced they're about to be fired and have been a fraud all along. Same event, radically different emotional experiences. The difference was not the criticism. The difference was the story each person told about the criticism, filtered through their beliefs, their history, and their habitual patterns of interpretation. This means something radical. If you change the story, you change the emotion. Not by denying reality, but by choosing a more accurate and more useful interpretation of it. This is the science of emotional mastery, and it is fundamentally different from emotional suppression, emotional performance, or toxic positivity. You're not pretending to feel something you don't. You're developing the skill to examine and update the stories generating your emotional experience. The first component of emotional mastery is differentiation, developing a precise emotional vocabulary. Research by neuroscientist Lisa Feldman Barrett suggests that people who can name their emotions with specificity, distinguishing between anxious and overwhelmed and apprehensive and dreading, have measurably better emotional regulation than those with limited vocabulary. This is because naming an emotion activates the prefrontal cortex, the rational brain, which automatically reduces the intensity of the amygdala's response. In fMRI studies, simply labeling an emotion, "I notice I'm feeling ashamed," reduces its neurological intensity within seconds. The language matters, too. Notice the difference between these two statements. I am terrified. I notice that terror is arising. The first fuses you with the emotion. It makes the emotion your identity. The second creates distance, observer from observed, which restores your capacity to choose your response. This is not semantic wordplay. It is a fundamental shift in the architecture of experience. The second component is acceptance without resignation. Most people's default response to unpleasant emotions is one of two dysfunctional extremes: suppression, pushing the feeling down, pretending it isn't there, or amplification, dwelling in it, feeding it with narrative, making it bigger than it is. Neither approach actually resolves the emotion. Suppression stores it. Amplification intensifies it. What actually works is allowing, simply letting the emotion be present without fighting it or inflating it. Breathe into it. Acknowledge it. This is grief. This is here right now. I'm allowing it. Neuroscientist Jill Bolte-Taylor's research on the biochemistry of emotions suggests that the neurochemical surge associated with any emotion, including intense ones like rage or terror, has a natural cycle of approximately 90 seconds if you don't cognitively reinforce it. 90 seconds. The suffering that lasts hours, days, or decades is almost always the result of the story layered on top of the emotion, not the emotion itself. The third component is reframing, the active cognitive skill of choosing a more useful interpretation. When a business venture fails, the automatic reframe might be, "I learned more in that failure than I could have learned in 5 years of success. What did it teach me? And how does that make my next attempt more intelligent?" When a relationship ends, the reframe might be, "This ending created space for something more aligned. What qualities do I now know I need? What did this experience develop in me?" Reframing is not pretending bad things are secretly good. It's refusing to let circumstances have the final word on what they mean. The fourth component is physical regulation, understanding that emotions are not just mental events, they are full-body physiological states. Your breathing pattern, your posture, your heart rate, your muscle tension. These are not just symptoms of your emotional state, they are part of your emotional state, and they are directly accessible. A slow, deep exhale activates the vagus nerve, triggering a parasympathetic response, the biological off switch for the stress system. Research published in the Journal of Neurophysiology confirms that diaphragmatic breathing shifts brainwave activity from anxious beta states toward calmer alpha states within minutes. Your breath is the remote control for your nervous system. By day 14 of this program, you'll have practiced each of these components enough to feel them shifting. Old emotional reflexes will begin to soften. The space between trigger and response will widen. You'll catch yourself choosing your interpretation, and in that choice, you'll taste something rare in modern life: genuine emotional sovereignty. Focus, the rarest currency of the 21st century. In 2004, the average American's attention span while using digital media was approximately 2.5 minutes. By 2012, it had dropped to 75 seconds. By 2020, researchers at MIT were measuring voluntary attention shifts occurring every 19 to 35 seconds in digitally connected adults. This isn't simply a productivity problem, it is a civilizational crisis, because everything that matters, creativity, deep learning, meaningful relationships, genuine mastery, requires something that is becoming vanishingly rare: sustained, voluntary attention. Focus is not a talent, it is not a personality trait, it is a skill. And like all skills, it degrades without training and strengthens with deliberate practice. But developing focus in the modern world requires something that goes deeper than productivity hacks and app timers. It requires understanding what attention actually is, why it's being systematically harvested, and how to reclaim it. Your attention is not yours by default. It is fought over, aggressively, scientifically, and profitably, by some of the most sophisticated engineering minds on the planet. Every notification, every algorithmically optimized scroll, every autoplay video has been designed by behavioral psychologists and machine learning systems to capture and hold your attention as long as possible. Silicon Valley has spent billions of dollars discovering exactly which stimuli your dopamine system cannot resist, and then deploying those stimuli relentlessly every hour of every day. The result is a population that is connected to everything and concentrated on nothing. The first step toward reclaiming your focus is understanding the distinction between reactive attention and chosen attention. Reactive attention is what your brain gives automatically to novelty, urgency, and emotional stimulation. Chosen attention is what you direct deliberately toward something that matters to you. Most people have almost no experience of chosen attention. They're mental. Lives are a series of reactions to notifications, to anxieties, to impulses, to other people's emergencies. This is not living deliberately. This is being a ball in a pinball machine. The foundation of focus is clarity of priority. When you know, with genuine conviction, what matters most, your brain's attentional resources naturally begin consolidating around that target. The clearer the priority, the more automatic the focus becomes. This is why elite performers in every field, surgeons, musicians, athletes, engineers, often describe entering states of deep focus effortlessly when working on something they genuinely care about. Their brain isn't fighting for focus, it's releasing into it. But clarity of priority alone isn't sufficient. You also need environmental architecture, the deliberate design of your physical and digital environment to support the kind of attention you want to cultivate. Cal Newport, a computer scientist and author who has extensively researched deep work, argues that the ability to focus without distraction on cognitively demanding tasks is becoming simultaneously rarer and more valuable in the modern economy. Those who develop this capacity will have a profound advantage over those who don't. Environmental design might mean phone in another room during focused work blocks, a dedicated physical space associated with deep concentration, headphones and ambient sound to signal focus mode to your brain. A start ritual, a specific sequence of actions that tells your nervous system it's time to shift into high engagement. The practice of single tasking is both ancient and revolutionary in today's context. The myth of multitasking has been thoroughly dismantled by cognitive science. What we call multitasking is actually rapid task switching, and it carries a measurable cognitive cost called switching tax, the mental overhead of disengaging from one context and re-engaging with another. Studies at Stanford found that chronic multitaskers are actually worse at filtering irrelevant information, worse at switching tasks efficiently, and worse at sustained attention than people who regularly practice single tasking. The very habit they think makes them more productive is degrading the cognitive faculties they most need. The practice of undivided attention, one task, full presence, no interruption, is not just a productivity strategy. It is a psychological experience. When you give your complete attention to something, you are simultaneously telling that thing it matters and telling yourself that you are capable of choosing where your mind goes. That's an act of self-respect that compounds over time. For days 15 through 21, the focus practice is structured in tiers. Begin with 25 minutes of single tasking on your highest priority work, followed by a genuine break, not scrolling, but moving, breathing, or simply allowing your mind to wander freely. This is the Pomodoro structure, and while it sounds simple, its consistent application is profoundly transformative. Gradually extend the focused blocks, from 25 minutes to 40, from 40 to 60. As your attention muscle strengthens, you'll find that focus stops feeling like effort and starts feeling like gravity, a natural pull toward depth rather than a constant battle against distraction. The measure of progress isn't how many hours you logged, it's the quality of presence you brought to each of them. Resilience, how to become unbreakable. On the morning of October 29, 2012, Hurricane Sandy made landfall near Atlantic City, New Jersey. Within hours, neighborhoods across the eastern seaboard were flooded, powerless, and shattered. Businesses that had operated for decades were wiped out overnight. Families lost everything they'd spent lifetimes building. In the aftermath, researchers who studied the survivors discovered something striking. Among the people who lost equivalent amounts, homes, businesses, savings, some descended into prolonged depression, substance abuse, and psychological breakdown. Others, within months, had rebuilt, some even stronger than before. Some reported that the crisis had clarified their values, deepened their relationships, and revealed capacities in themselves they never knew they had. Same storm, radically different outcomes. The difference was not luck, it was not wealth, it was not even the extent of the loss. It was psychological resilience. And the good news, confirmed by decades of research, is that it is entirely learnable. Mental resilience is not toughness in the conventional sense. It is not the refusal to feel pain or the performance of strength in the face of suffering. It is something far more sophisticated, the capacity to bend without breaking, to absorb impact without losing your core, and to find forward motion even when the ground beneath you has disappeared. The foundation of resilience is what Stanford psychologist Carol Dweck calls the growth mindset, the fundamental belief that your capabilities, your character, and your intelligence are not fixed properties, but developable qualities. That challenges are not evidence of your limitations, but invitations to expand them. With a fixed mindset, difficulty means danger. This is hard becomes, I must not be capable. Failure becomes identity. The goal shifts from growth to self-protection. With a growth mindset, difficulty means information. This is hard becomes, this is where the growth is. Failure becomes feedback. The goal remains learning, regardless of the outcome. This single cognitive shift does not prevent pain. It does not make loss less real or setbacks less disorienting, but it fundamentally alters the meaning assigned to those experiences. And meaning is everything when it comes to recovery. The second pillar of resilience is cognitive flexibility, the ability to update your interpretation of events as new information arrives, to abandon strategies that aren't working without abandoning your goal, and to generate multiple possible paths forward when the obvious one is blocked. Rigid thinking, the insistence on one interpretation, one approach, one outcome, creates brittleness. When the world refuses to cooperate with your rigid model, you shatter. Flexible thinking creates adaptive capacity. When circumstances change, you change your approach. The goal remains. The method evolves. The third pillar is emotional processing rather than emotional storage. Resilient people don't avoid grief, fear, or anger. They move through those emotions with full awareness, extract whatever information they carry, and continue forward without being permanently defined by them. Research on grief, trauma, and recovery consistently shows that the people who recover most fully are not those who grieve least, but those who grieve most completely, who allow the full weight of loss to be felt, expressed, and metabolized rather than stored in the body and the psyche as a slow-burning wound. The fourth pillar is purposeful narrative. The story you tell yourself about why you're here and what the difficult experiences mean in the context of your larger journey. Viktor Frankl's foundational insight, born from the extremity of Holocaust survival, holds at every scale of human suffering. Those who have a why can endure almost any how. When your life has direction, when your pain serves something larger than itself, suffering becomes transformative rather than merely destructive. What is your why? What are you building, protecting, becoming? When the answer to that question is vivid and genuinely compelling, setbacks become temporary detours rather than permanent endpoints. By day 21 of this program, you will have built practices that support all four pillars of resilience. Not as abstract concepts, but as daily disciplines, small, consistent acts that gradually construct an inner architecture capable of bearing enormous weight. Visualization, the technology your mind was built for. In 1983, Soviet sports scientists published research that would quietly change the way elite athletes around the world prepared for competition. The study divided Olympic athletes into 4 groups with different training ratios of physical practice versus mental visualization. Group 1 trained physically 100% of the time. Group 4 trained physically 25% of the time and spent 75% in structured mental rehearsal. Group 4 outperformed all others. This wasn't an outlier. It has since been replicated across dozens of sports, disciplines, and performance domains. The conclusion, consistently supported by neuroimaging research: vivid mental rehearsal activates nearly identical neural pathways as physical practice. When you visualize an action in sufficient detail, with full sensory engagement, genuine emotional presence, and conscious intention, your nervous system responds as though the event is real. Motor neurons fire. Neural pathways strengthen. The brain begins building the infrastructure for a performance that hasn't happened yet. This is not the law of attraction. This is neuroscience. The distinction is crucial because effective visualization is not passive fantasy. It is not lying in bed imagining success while doing nothing about it. It is active mental training, a discipline as demanding and as productive as physical practice. Effective visualization has 5 non-negotiable elements. Specificity. Vague images create vague results. If you're preparing for a difficult negotiation, you don't visualize it going well. You visualize the specific room, the specific faces, your specific opening statement, the specific tone of your voice, the specific posture of your body. You visualize 3 possible challenging moments and rehearse your response to each. First-person perspective. Research consistently shows that visualization from a first-person view, looking through your own eyes, not watching yourself from outside, produces stronger neural activation and better performance outcomes. Sensory completeness. Include what you see, hear, feel physically, and even smell when relevant. The more senses engaged, the more real the experience registers to your subconscious mind. Emotional authenticity. The emotion must be genuine. You cannot simply narrate success while feeling dread and expect the programming to take. You must actually generate the feeling, the confidence, the satisfaction, the calm competence, while the visualization is occurring. Process and outcome. The most powerful visualizations rehearse not just the end point, but the path, the specific behaviors, decisions, and responses that lead there. Research by Gabriele Oettingen at NYU found that people who visualize only the outcome are actually less likely to achieve it than people who visualize both the outcome and the process. For the purposes of this program, visualization practice is assigned to both morning and evening. Morning visualization primes your nervous system for the day's most important challenges. Evening visualization processes the day's experiences and programs your subconscious mind during sleep's consolidation phase. Start with 5 minutes. Eyes closed, phone away. Build the scene. Step inside it. Let it be real. With practice, and practice here means daily repetition over 3 to 4 weeks, the vividness, emotional resonance, and neurological impact of your visualizations will increase dramatically. What begins as a fuzzy mental movie becomes a detailed, emotionally rich, physiologically activating experience. And your brain begins to build the reality it has been repeatedly rehearsing. Discipline, the bridge between dreams and reality. There is a conversation that plays out in millions of American homes every January. A person makes a resolution. They feel the surge of intention, genuinely powerful, genuinely real. They imagine the version of themselves on the other side of the change, leaner, healthier, more productive, more free. They buy the equipment, download the app, tell their friends. By February 1st, according to research from the University of Scranton, 91% of those resolutions have already been abandoned. This is not a failure of desire. Those people genuinely wanted to change. It is a failure of discipline architecture, a fundamental misunderstanding of how sustained behavioral change actually works. Most people approach discipline as a matter of motivation. If I just want it enough, they tell themselves, I'll do it. And when motivation inevitably fluctuates, as all emotions do, they interpret the loss of that feeling as a signal that they don't really want it after all. So they stop. This is the lie that keeps millions of people cycling through the same failed attempts year after year. Motivation is a weather pattern. It comes and goes. Discipline is infrastructure. It functions regardless of conditions. The neuroscience of discipline begins with understanding the ego depletion model, the finding by psychologist Roy Baumeister that self-control draws on a finite cognitive resource that depletes with use. Every decision you make, every impulse you resist, every moment you force yourself to focus when you'd rather drift, each one draws down the same limited reserve. This is why making important decisions late in a day of cognitive strain reliably produces worse outcomes than making the same decisions fresh in the morning. It's why judges give harsher sentences before lunch than after. It's why disciplined people typically design their environment to minimize the number of self-control demands placed on them, rather than relying on willpower to overcome constant temptation. The first strategy of effective discipline is decision elimination. Remove choices from your environment so that the disciplined option becomes the default. If you want to eat well, don't rely on willpower at 9 p.m. Don't keep junk food in the house. If you want to exercise in the morning, lay out your clothes the night before and schedule the workout as a non-negotiable appointment. Every time you eliminate a decision point, you preserve willpower reserves for the moments when they genuinely matter. The second strategy is identity-based habit formation, a framework articulated powerfully by James Clear in Atomic Habits. Most people set behavior goals. I want to run 3 miles a day. Identity-based discipline sets identity goals. I am someone who moves their body every morning. The distinction seems subtle, its effects are profound. When your behavior is driven by identity rather than outcome, the question stops being, "Do I feel like doing this today?" and becomes, "Is this what someone like me does?" Identity provides a stable motivational anchor that persists through fluctuations in feeling. Every time you act in accordance with the identity you're building, even in the smallest way, you cast a vote for that identity. And over time, those votes accumulate into a new self-concept that makes the disciplined behavior feel not like an effort, but like an expression of who you are. The third strategy is keystone habit identification. Not all habits are created equal. Certain behaviors, exercise, meditation, structured sleep schedules, journaling, have disproportionate effects on adjacent areas of life. They create what researchers call positive spillover. Improvements in focus, nutrition, emotional regulation, and productivity that weren't directly targeted. Rather than attempting to overhaul your entire behavioral landscape simultaneously, identify the 1 or 2 keystone habits that will create the most cascading positive effects. Build those first, with intensity and consistency. Let the ripples spread. The fourth strategy, often overlooked, is strategic recovery. Discipline is not the same as relentlessness. The brain and body require rest, genuine rest, not passive scrolling, to consolidate learning, restore energy, and maintain the neural resources that make focused effort possible. Elite performers in every domain, athletes, musicians, surgeons, writers, structure their work in concentrated bursts followed by deliberate recovery. The recovery isn't separate from the performance. It is part of the performance system. For days 15 through 21 of this program, you'll apply these 4 strategies in sequence. The goal is not to white-knuckle your way through every day. The goal is to build a system so well designed that discipline becomes gradually and genuinely the path of least resistance. Mental models. Upgrading your operating system. In 1984, a 25-year-old software programmer sat in a garage in Cupertino, California, staring at lines of code that weren't behaving the way he expected. The problem wasn't the code. The code was exactly what he'd written. The problem was the model in his head, his understanding of how the system should work, which turned out to be incomplete. When he updated his model, when he replaced a flawed assumption with a more accurate one, the code worked instantly. That programmer's name is irrelevant to the story's point. The point is this: most of the failures in your life are not failures of effort. They are failures of model. You are working hard, applying genuine energy, and getting disappointing results, because the framework through which you're interpreting the situation is incomplete, outdated, or simply wrong. Mental models are the invisible architecture of your thinking. They are the assumptions you make about how things work, what's possible, what's allowed, and what to expect. And like the programmer's code, your results will never exceed the accuracy of your model. The most transformative mental model in modern psychology is the one you've already encountered in these pages, the growth mindset. But there are others equally worth examining and installing. Abundance versus scarcity. The scarcity mindset operates from the assumption that there is a fixed quantity of success, opportunity, and resources, meaning someone else's gain is your loss. This model produces fear-based decision-making, competitive rather than collaborative behavior, and a persistent undercurrent of anxiety about not having or getting enough. The abundance mindset operates from the opposite assumption. That value can be created rather than merely divided. That someone else's success creates more possibility, not less. That the world is genuinely large enough for your ambitions and mine simultaneously. Neither model is objectively, universally true in every context, but which one produces better decisions, more creative solutions, and more effective behavior is not a close contest. Responsibility versus victimhood. These are not moral categories. They are strategic ones. The victim consciousness model asks, what happened to me? Who is responsible for my circumstances? What forces have worked against me? This model may be emotionally validating, but it produces one practical outcome: paralysis. The responsibility model asks, what can I control? What response is available to me? What action, however small, can I take right now? This model does not deny that unfair things happen. It simply refuses to let those unfair things have permanent authority over your choices. Research consistently shows that people with an internal locus of control, those who believe their actions significantly influence their outcomes, report higher levels of achievement, well-being, and life satisfaction than those with an external locus. Not because life is always fair or circumstances always cooperate, but because believing you can act effectively makes you more likely to act effectively. Process versus outcome. The outcome mindset evaluates every action by its immediate result. A cold call that doesn't convert is a failure. A workout that doesn't show visible results in a week is pointless. A creative project that doesn't immediately succeed is evidence of inadequacy. The process mindset evaluates actions by their quality and consistency, trusting that quality processes executed consistently produce quality outcomes over time, not necessarily immediately, but inevitably. The outcome mindset produces anxiety because outcomes are never fully within your control. The process mindset produces confidence because processes are. Systems versus goals. This is an extension of the process model articulated with particular clarity by Scott Adams, creator of Dilbert. People who optimize for goals are perpetually in a state of failure until the goal is achieved, then briefly successful, then immediately in failure again as they reach for the next goal. People who optimize for systems, daily practices that compound toward desired directions, are continuously succeeding with every execution of the system. Installing a new mental model is not purely intellectual. The model must be felt as well as understood. This is where visualization, storytelling, and emotional rehearsal become crucial, helping you experience what it feels like to operate from the new framework until that feeling becomes more familiar than the old one. The language of transformation. Words are not merely symbols, they are physiological events. Research in psycholinguistics and neuroscience has demonstrated consistently that the language you use, both internally and externally, activates specific neural circuits, generates measurable hormonal responses, and shapes the physical structure of your brain over time. This is why the language of your inner dialogue is not a cosmetic concern. It is a Structural 1. The most common mistake people make with affirmations and self-talk practices is treating language as costume rather than architecture. They repeat positive statements while their underlying physiological state signals the opposite, creating a dissonance that the subconscious mind correctly identifies as inauthentic and largely ignores. Effective linguistic reprogramming requires understanding the 4 dimensions of impactful self-talk. Believability. The new statement must reside within what psychologists call your zone of proximal development, close enough to your current reality that your brain doesn't immediately reject it, but directionally accurate toward where you're going. I am the world's most confident person, when you're experiencing genuine social anxiety, creates cognitive dissonance. I am developing greater confidence every day, and I have evidence of it, is both true and directionally powerful. Present tense specificity. Language framed in the present tense activates different neural circuits than language framed in the future. I am building a life I love activates identity-level processing. I will someday build a life I love activates planning-level processing. The difference in neurological impact is significant. Emotional charge. As established earlier, the subconscious mind responds disproportionately to emotionally activated content. Speak your affirmations with genuine feeling. Connect them to the reasons behind your goals. Let the why generate the emotional current that carries the words into deep programming. Frequency and consistency. Linguistic reprogramming is not a weekend retreat activity. It is a daily practice. The phrases you repeat most frequently, with the most emotional intensity in the most receptive states, are the ones that ultimately shape your neural landscape. Make the practice non-negotiable. 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes in the evening. Consistent repetition over 30 days creates measurable change. The language of transformation also extends to how you describe your experiences and identity to others. Every time you tell someone, "I'm terrible with money," you reinforce a neural pathway. Every time you say, "I'm not a people person," you deepen a groove. Every time you describe yourself as someone who never finishes things, you program a script. Begin treating the story you tell about yourself as sacred and consequential, because it is. Not because the world will hold you to it, though it often will, but because you are listening, all the time, and your subconscious mind is taking meticulous notes. Replace the story, not with fiction, with a more complete truth. I'm learning how to manage money effectively. I'm developing my ability to connect with people. I'm building the habit of following through. These aren't denials of current reality. They are declarations of trajectory. And trajectory is what actually determines destination. The flow state, living at your highest frequency. In 1975, a Hungarian-American psychologist named Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi sat in his office at the University of Chicago and asked a simple but extraordinary question. When are people most alive? Not most comfortable, not most relaxed. Most alive, most fully engaged, most deeply present, most genuinely satisfied. He spent the next 4 decades answering that question. He interviewed chess masters and surgeons, rock climbers and farmers, factory workers and novelists. He discovered that across wildly different activities and cultures, the experience of peak aliveness shared a consistent set of characteristics. He called it flow. And his research became one of the most replicated and consequential bodies of work in the history of psychological science. Flow is the state of complete absorption in a challenging activity. In flow, self-consciousness disappears. Time distortion occurs. Hours feel like minutes, or minutes feel expanded and infinite. Performance elevates far beyond normal baseline. The activity becomes intrinsically rewarding, not for what it produces, but for what it is. Athletes describe it as being in the zone. Musicians describe it as channeling something larger than themselves. Writers describe it as the words flowing without effort. Surgeons describe it as the procedure becoming effortless clarity. This is not mysticism. This is neurochemistry. During flow states, the brain releases a specific cocktail of neurochemicals: norepinephrine, dopamine, endorphins, anandamide, and serotonin, in a combination that is simultaneously performance-enhancing, creativity-boosting, and deeply satisfying. Csikszentmihalyi estimated that flow represents the single most productive state the human brain is capable of achieving, with research suggesting performance improvements of 200 to 500% over baseline. But flow is not random. It is producible, and understanding its mechanics gives you the ability to enter it more deliberately and more frequently. The primary condition for flow is the challenge-skill balance. Flow occurs at the precise intersection where the difficulty of the task slightly exceeds your current skill level. Too easy, and you experience boredom, a signal that you're under-challenged. Too difficult, and you experience anxiety, a signal that the gap between demand and capacity is too large. Flow lives between boredom and anxiety in the narrow band where you're stretched but not overwhelmed. This means that cultivating flow requires two simultaneous practices: continuously increasing the challenge of what you're attempting and continuously building the skill to meet that challenge. Neither stagnation nor reckless overreach produces flow. Progressive, intentional growth does. The second condition is clear goals and immediate feedback. In flow, you always know what you're trying to do, and you're always receiving real-time information about how well you're doing it. Ambiguity breaks flow. Clarity sustains it. This is a design principle you can apply to any activity. Before beginning a focused work session, define precisely what you're attempting to accomplish. Build in checkpoints that give you feedback on progress. Remove ambiguity about what success looks like in this specific context. The third condition is absence of distraction. This connects directly to the focus discipline developed in Chapter 7. Flow requires what neuroscientist Daniel Levitin calls transient hypofrontality, a temporary reduction in prefrontal cortex activity that allows the brain to stop monitoring, self-evaluating, and second-guessing itself. This quieting of the inner critic is both a hallmark and a requirement of flow. Every interruption, every ping, every glance at a phone, every background anxiety reactivates the prefrontal monitoring systems and breaks the transient hypofrontality. Research suggests it takes an average of 23 minutes to return to deep focus after a distraction. This means that in a workday punctuated by constant interruptions, some people never enter flow at all. Designing for flow means designing against distraction, ruthlessly and unapologetically. The fourth condition is personal meaning. Flow is most accessible in activities connected to something you genuinely care about. This doesn't mean you can only experience flow in work you're passionate about. Skilled practitioners can achieve flow in almost any complex activity, but alignment between the activity and your values accelerates access dramatically. For days, 22 through 28 of this program, the focus is on identifying your flow triggers, the specific conditions, environments, and activity types where you most naturally access these states, and deliberately creating those conditions with increasing frequency. The goal is not to live in flow perpetually. That is neither possible nor desirable. Flow is a peak state, not a resting state. The goal is to access flow regularly enough that it becomes a familiar, achievable experience rather than a rare accident. And in those Hours of flow, you will produce more, create more deeply, and feel more genuinely alive than in all the scattered, distracted, half-present hours combined. Breaking the walls you built around yourself. In 1954, when Roger Bannister crossed the 4-minute mile finish line in Oxford, something changed in human history. Not because the feat was physically remarkable, though it was, but because it proved irrefutably that the most limiting barriers in human achievement are almost never external. They are almost always internal, and they are almost always invisible until someone walks through them and makes them visible to everyone else. Your mental barriers are specific, personal, and systematic. They are the invisible architecture that determines which opportunities you notice, which risks you take, which rooms you allow yourself to enter, and which possibilities you dismiss before they've even had a chance to be examined. They feel like facts. They are not facts. They are conclusions drawn from incomplete data, usually in childhood, usually under emotional duress, and almost never revisited with adult critical thinking. The 5 most universal mental barriers in the American psychological landscape, based on decades of therapeutic and coaching research, are worth examining closely. Imposter syndrome, the pervasive belief that you are not genuinely qualified for the success you've achieved and that you will eventually be found out. Impostor syndrome affects an estimated 70% of people at some point in their lives and is disproportionately prevalent among high achievers. Its paradoxical nature, the more you accomplish, the more you may doubt your legitimacy, makes it uniquely corrosive. The antidote is not false confidence, it is evidence-based self-assessment. The deliberate practice of cataloging actual competencies, actual accomplishments, and actual value delivered, without filtering it through the distorting lens of I just got lucky. Perfectionism, the belief that anything less than flawless execution is unacceptable, and therefore that starting is dangerous, completing is terrifying, and sharing is impossible. Perfectionism masquerades as high standards. It is actually fear of evaluation wearing the costume of excellence. The antidote is iterative action, the understanding that excellence is an emergent property of repeated attempts and honest feedback, not a prerequisite for beginning. Scarcity identity, the deeply held belief that you are not the kind of person who gets certain things. Not the kind of person who builds wealth, leads organizations, attracts extraordinary relationships, or creates lasting impact. This belief doesn't prevent you from wanting those things. It prevents you from expecting them, and it subtly, constantly sabotages your behavior in the direction of confirming your expectation. The antidote is exposure and evidence. Deliberately putting yourself in contact with people who have achieved what you want and treating their reality as evidence of possibility rather than evidence of your inadequacy by contrast. Fear of visibility, the terror of being seen, known, and evaluated. Many people's deepest fear is not failure. It is being seen failing. Or worse, being seen succeeding and then facing the expectations that creates. This fear keeps brilliant people small, silent, and invisible, producing for audiences of one when they have the capacity to create real impact. The antidote is graduated exposure, small, consistent acts of visibility that build a neurological track record of surviving being seen, belonging uncertainty. The nagging question of whether you are genuinely welcome in the rooms you most want to occupy. Whether you have the right background, the right accent, the right pedigree, the right kind of story. This barrier is particularly powerful for first-generation achievers, immigrants, and anyone who grew up in environments that didn't look like the places they're now trying to reach. The antidote is community and proof. Finding others who share your background and have navigated the transition, and letting their existence disrupt the narrative that you don't belong. Each of these barriers can be addressed through the same three-step process. Identify, examine, act despite. Identify the barrier with precision. Name it specifically. I believe I will be exposed as incompetent is more tractable than I'm just not confident. Examine its origins and validity. When did this belief form? What evidence actually supports it? What evidence contradicts it that you've been systematically ignoring? Act despite the barrier's presence. Not because the fear has disappeared, it won't disappear immediately, but because action, taken repeatedly in the face of fear, is the neurological mechanism through which the fear gradually loses authority over behavior. Courage is not the absence of fear, it is the decision that something else matters more. Living the program. Integration for life. Everything you've read in these 14 chapters means nothing, not until it is lived. This is the brutal, beautiful truth about every framework for personal transformation. Knowledge does not change lives. Applied, practiced, embodied knowledge changes lives. And the gap between knowing and doing is exactly where most people spend their entire lives. Integration, the process of weaving mind mastery principles into the irreducible dailiness of your actual life, is where the real work begins. And it is work that does not end. But here is what makes it sustainable. After 30 days of consistent practice, the practices themselves begin to feel like home. The morning ritual becomes as automatic as brushing your teeth. The self-talk interruption becomes as instinctive as ducking when something flies toward your head. The emotional regulation becomes less effortful, more natural. The focus deepens with less struggle. This is the compound effect of neural change. The pathways built during these 30 days become the highways of your new mental operating system. The architecture of the final phase, days 22 through 30, is integration, not addition. You are not learning new techniques. You are weaving the techniques you've learned into a coherent daily practice that can sustain for years. Morning protocol, 15 to 20 minutes, non-negotiable, begins with 3 deep breaths and a brief body scan to arrive in the day with presence rather than urgency. Followed by 5 minutes of visualization, seeing your ideal day, your ideal responses to anticipated challenges, the person you are choosing to be. Followed by 3 to 5 affirmations spoken aloud with genuine emotion. Followed by a single intention for the day, not a to-do list item, but a quality of being. Today I am patient. Today I am fully present in every conversation. Today I lead with generosity. Midday. Recalibration. 2 to 3 minutes at the halfway point of the day. Simply check in. Have you been living the intention you set? Have you slipped into old patterns? No judgment, just honest observation, followed by a deliberate reset. 3 breaths. Restate the intention. Continue. Evening integration. 10 minutes before sleep. Review the day not for productivity output, but for psychological growth. Where did you apply what you've been practicing? Where did old patterns surface? What did you learn about yourself? What would you choose differently tomorrow? Finish with gratitude, genuine, specific gratitude, and a brief visualization of tomorrow's best version of yourself. These 3 practices, applied consistently, create a feedback loop that accelerates everything else. Each day teaches you something. Each night consolidates the lesson. Each morning you begin slightly further forward. The world will continue to present its tests. There will be days when anxiety rises faster than awareness. Days when old voices are louder than new ones. Days when the discipline feels fragile and the progress feels invisible. On those days, remember this: The measure of transformation is not perfection. It is return velocity, how quickly you return to your practice after drifting from it. You will drift, return. That is the practice. The person you are becoming is built not in the moments of perfect execution, but in the moments of honest return, when you choose, again, to be the author of your inner life, rather than its reluctant audience. Conclusion: control is yours. On day one of this program, you woke up with the same brain you've had for decades, running programs installed before you were old enough to question them, generating thoughts that mostly repeated yesterday's thoughts, reacting to the world with patterns developed in childhood for a world that no longer exists. On day 30, that is no longer your story. In 30 days, you have done something extraordinary. You have intervened in the most intimate and consequential process of your life, the generation and direction of your own consciousness. You have chosen, deliberately and daily, to become the programmer rather than the program. You've built the habit of conscious awareness, the capacity to observe your thoughts without being consumed by them. You've excavated limiting beliefs that have been operating invisibly for years and begun replacing them with frameworks that actually serve your life. You've reprogrammed your subconscious through repetition, emotion, and vivid imagery, laying new neural tracks that will continue to strengthen with use. You've reclaimed your inner dialogue, choosing the language of growth over the language of limitation, the voice of a coach over the voice of a critic. You've developed emotional mastery, the ability to feel fully without being ruled, to respond wisely without suppressing, to find useful information in even the most difficult feelings. You've rebuilt your focus, recovering the most valuable cognitive resource in a distracted age. You've cultivated resilience, developing the inner architecture to absorb impact and find forward motion, always. You've practiced visualization, training your nervous system for outcomes before they arrive, building the neural infrastructure of success. You've built discipline, not as willpower, but as identity, system, and environment. You've upgraded your mental models, replacing outdated frameworks with lenses that reveal more possibility and generate more effective action. You've transformed your language, understanding that the words you repeat most become the walls or the windows of your inner world. You've accessed flow, tasting the state where you operate at your highest frequency. You've broken through barriers, recognizing the difference between real limitations and beliefs that only felt like limitations until you walked through them. And you've integrated it all, building a daily practice that will continue to compound for the rest of your life. This is not the end. It is the beginning of a different relationship with the most powerful force in your life. Your mind, conscious, directed, yours. The wild animal has been trained, the autopilot has been overridden, the wheel is in your hands. Control is yours. What will you do with it